Welcome to the Healers Café, the number one show for medical practitioners and holistic healers to have heart to heart conversations about their day to day lives while sharing their expertise for improving your health and wellness. So, welcome to the Healers Cafe. And today I have with me Helen Dobra. And well, I guess we've met over a wonderful summit that she hosted. And let me tell you a little bit about her. So she has a Bachelor of Science, diploma of Bowen therapy. She's a massage therapist. She's also a practitioner of the Richards trauma process, does applied kinergetic kinesiology. She's a wellness educator, a mediation facilitator, a Qigong instructor, a wilderness trekking guide, and a mindful wellness mentor. So that's a whole bunch of things. I know you were part of creating a wonderful movie on Bowen therapy. So I'm just going to first pass it to you and well, welcome you. Yeah, welcome. Let's
Oh,
start with
thanks,
that.
Manon. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the Healers Cafe. What a privilege.
So I think my first question to you really is what led you to this path? I mean, you've got lots of skills, lots of modalities, but that's usually not you know, it's not the modalities that first get us into the path. It's usually, other things that bring us there, and then we discover on our path the things that make sense. Is that your case, or how is your coming into this?
Interesting question. I was just thinking about that the other day. I suppose I was born into a family of healers. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. They kind of partly raised me. They were first generation Australian from Eastern Europe, from Hungary and Serbia. And my grandmother used always a lot of herbs and tinctures and was always researching herbs. And my grandfather, he learnt some techniques while he was in the army. And that was kind of manipulation, I suppose. Like people used to come to him to fix sprained ankles and wrists and things like that. So I'd always have people coming to our house.
Mm.
And I suppose when I'd finished, I was in school, I knew that I was going to be doing this work and I was going to study one day. But at the time, it wasn't very well recognized. And I thought I'd get my science degree because my first passion was the environment and I wanted to work in the bush. And I thought, well, for a woman to be able to work in the environment, the obvious thing for me to do was do my science.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you feel about that now? If you were guiding, yeah, a person to follow footsteps, do you agree with all your footsteps?
Yeah, and yeah, I think I wouldn't have been mature enough to do the work that I do now, and it's like I wouldn't have been able to um, work in a clinic sort of situation like I am now. Um, so having that background just sort of has given me a well-rounded baseline, I suppose, foundations to do the work that I do in a much more holistic way. Um, I suppose the other thing, going back to your question, was why I also it kind of flowed into therapy. I thought that I'd do it a lot later in life, but I was into extreme sports and I had a back issue noticeable from probably the age of 16. And my first manipulation was on a trek and my back was really sore. I was carrying kind of like a 15-kilo pack in the wilderness, and there was a chiropractor on the trip and said, oh, your pelvis is out of alignment, and laid me down and gave me this kind of really brutal treatment back then, which was, that force manipulation. Um, but that was ongoing back issues for a really long time. And that was the treatment that I would get. And I was in a sort of climbing accident in the Himalayas when I was 25, and my life turned around at that point when I returned back to Australia. Um, my back was really bad at that point, and I was having chiropractic and osteopath twice a week, and it wasn't holding. And and I was also, it affected my mental health, but also because on this expedition, it was a really quite a traumatic situation where we were in an avalanche, and
Oh,
so there was 12 caught in the avalanche, and I was very close to being in that avalanche, and the person that I was standing next to, a 14-year-old porter, was taken by an ice sheet. So for me, I think I went into depression about that. And
mm,
it was interesting how it affected my mental health, but also my body. And it was only till later, when I was 25, I sort of went through my own healing journey. So I was 25. And for a year, I was in a lot of pain and depressed after that trip coming back to Australia. And then I, transformed my life, and my back was better. But it was looking back now, it was very linked to my mental state and the trauma. And
mm.
then, following that path now, I've sort of come full circle to understand deeply how what's going on in the subconscious affects our bodies and our health.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And what you're saying about trauma too, right? We're in a system generally where people don't understand yet the full impact of trauma, the emotional aspect of trauma. So they see injury and they have no idea how to address that part, so they go to, chiropractors, to, different type of body workers that try to put the pieces together. But until you release the trauma, um, nothing really happens, and I've had lots of patients that, because of Bowen therapy, have had that shift, where they actually are getting better because the trauma is, um, we're able to address the actual trauma, so how did you address the trauma, and what was your steps, how you're in your discovery of all of this?
Well, it's only really in the last 10 years, I've been practicing for about 16, and I started to see, I was always interested in mind body Bowen. It was like something that I was instantly gravitated towards, and started using the meridian ancient Chinese system, looking at the energy pathways. So pretty much for 16 years, I'd always been looking at that as a diagnostic tool. And it was all interesting, the patterns that I was seeing with clients that were coming in, how their symptoms would be mirroring, the tools, the diagnostic tools of what the emotional link was between what was going on in the body. So I was always investigating and looking and really interested in that process. And it wasn't, but I was always kind of having the science mind. It was very scientific focus. I'd always be sort of working it out. Um, and then I saw that it was, people would be coming out with their stories, and it would always mirror what I was seeing within the meridian system. And then it was from observation of my own experiences over years, and having other stressful events happen, going
Right.
through more of my own personal journey, where I was like, I'm a Bowen therapist, and this is still happening to my back. Why is, my back is a consistent issue? And then I started researching about the psoas, and
Mhm,
that was from the Eastern philosophies with yoga.
mhm.
And I started linking, what was going on in the stress response and what was happening to the psoas, and also linking that to the meridian system. And slowly, as I kept researching, all the pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together. I'm also studying, TRTP trauma, because I went through quite a traumatic um, breakdown in my long-term relationship. And from that point, I had serious insomnia. And the insomnia was so bad that it was going for days and days. So I was trying to bring my body back to balance. But obviously the traumas had stacked,
Right.
and it was after studying the TRTP and applying and then studying Qigong as well, was I really understanding the effect that the stacking of trauma has on the autonomic nervous system,
Mhm.
and how that people don't realize as stressful events stack, the subconscious remembers everything.
Yeah.
And you can go to different therapies, but it doesn't matter what it is. It can be symptom based. Even complementary therapies can be symptom based, because we're not actually releasing from the brain.
Yeah.
We can release a certain amount from the body somatically, but if those events are happening in the subconscious, it's like the brain's already overloaded. So it doesn't take much to get overloaded again. A little simple thing, you get tired because the body's already on overload. You've got the foot on the accelerator, your body's just geared and going in that sympathetic mode. And so it doesn't take much to tip the balance, because the body's already geared. It's going in that mode. And so you can get tired, or you just get overwhelmed at home as a mum, or whatever's going on. And so it just perpetuates that cycle. And so what I can see from experience with myself and clients is that once we can truly empty those events from the subconscious mind, then we can have a clear slate. We can come into this reality without all the overload from the past, and be able to deal with and have a much effective way of sort of balancing our own nervous system. And so this is sort of the work I do in my clinic now. Is I talk to all my clients about that from the time they come in, is for them to understand what's going on. Because without that understanding and connection with how do I feel when I'm in rest, relax, repair, how do I feel when I'm out of there? What are the things that happen? What are the indicators that I have? I'm not connecting, I'm a bit agitated, my pain comes up, I don't have as much energy, so that you can start to regulate your own nervous system. So you're not reliant on a therapist. I mean, I see therapists, or whatever therapy you decide to do, is a tool, a very useful tool to quickly bring you back to balance. But ultimately, it's you sustaining that with the tools that you have moving forward. And, why it's so important is because I think that ultimately we can be our best self, where our brains can function differently. We can be more open and creative and move forward to help humanity, ultimately. So, that way the healing has the ripple effect to help others.
Right, right. Yeah, so it sounds like, and correct me, that you use, like, you create a context with your clients for them to understand the parts that they can work on themselves to sort of modulate the experience of the trauma as remembered by the subconscious, in a sense. And, like, in other words, find a place of, like, modulate their emotions. Is that how you work it? Or could you explain further how you combine that with Bowen therapy?
Yeah, well, usually a person will come in with not much awareness of what's going on. They're just in a spiral of pain or anxiety, depression, or whatever the symptom may be that they've come in. Usually it's pain. And firstly, I use the Bowen to get the body very easily and effectively and quickly back into rest, relax, repair. I get people to keep a diary of what's going on, you know, like what are you noticing? What are the changes? I also give them release exercises that are based on yoga principles to ground the body, to give the body space and to bring the energy in, because now there's a chi imbalance. So much energy has been taken up into stress mode that now let's bring it all back so we can bring the nervous system back to balance. And then as they're starting to connect with what's going on for them and an awareness of when I'm in rest, relax, repair, when I'm not, with that awareness, they start to connect the mind body. And oh, I got overloaded today and this is what I felt. And I sort of work with them. So once they're pain free, okay, so what do we need to do? What tools can we put in place so that you can bring the nervous system back into alignment? So for me, I say, okay, and obviously I look at, is the Bowen holding? Is this system of rest, relax, repair holding? And, you know, and what's going to be required. So I'll see them for, you know, maybe 4 times. Usually a lot of symptoms are very quickly resolved. And then I say, okay, let's lengthen that to 1 month, and we'll see you in 2 months, and then 3. And then if it's not holding, then I look at doing the TRTP. And I may also implement Anne Schubert's work, which is trauma, a very simple technique to release trauma within the Bowen if it presents itself. And then, you know, sort of make that working with what the body's saying. So really listening. But I find for some people, the trauma is so embedded that if the Bowen's not holding, I recommend the TRTP. And then from that point, it's a game changer. And that's when they've released, and they're released so much, like within 2 sessions, they've released some very serious stressful events that may have an emotional charge of 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10. They may have multiple, it could be 6, 10, and all of those are released by the 2nd session. So very, very big releases. And then within the 3rd session, they're 2 hours each, you're already creating into the future. So now with those emotional charges gone, it's not like they also become aware of their program. And we talk about, okay, so what's in your environment? What is the dynamic that you've created or partly being responsible for? What do we need to do in our environment that's creating this trigger? Like really looking at what's going on, because ultimately, you know, if like a healthy fish back in a toxic pond, you're going to get sick again. So it's really because I believe our body is a reflection of what's going in the subconscious, but also what's going on in our environment. So, you know, we're responsible for what have we created in our environment with the dynamic of the what we've been creating from subconscious core beliefs that we've taken on. And often it's like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, it's not safe for me to be seen and heard. So often the person may not even ask for the help they need, or they may be in a job that they're not communicating that actually this is not okay, I need support. But they've not had those conversations because I don't matter, or whatever the subconscious belief is. So suddenly they've created an environment that they're being consistently re-triggered because they're overwhelmed, because it's not safe for me to communicate. that I need support or whatever it is, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of, he's actually Australian. Chris, no, sorry, that might be an insult, but he's from New Zealand. I know sometimes there's issues
Yeah.
there. But Chris Duncan, have you heard of him?
Oh, no, I haven't. No.
Okay, well, I mean, the work is around. It's just people present it in different ways. And he has a book called "You're Not Broken," and
Oh.
he very much talks about our responsibility to be co-creators of our, of our future. But he has a methodology that I've used very effectively. I mean, parts of, it's like, it's not his work, it's work that he, as all therapists do, you learn from amazing mentors, and then you kind of make it fit your understanding, your personality, your education, and so everything morphs into exactly what it needs to be for you to to be your most efficient self, right? So but it's very well put together, and this reminds me a little bit of this. Can you give a little more understanding of, you said it was Schubert's work in Bowen. Is it Bowen moves per se, or is it um, contextual to Bowen, or how, or is it to do the psoas and that, you know, um, a response to it, or what is that?
What would your life be like if you were pain-free? If you were one of the millions who suffer from chronic pain, the thought of just one day without it may seem impossible. This is often because conventional medicine tends to fall short in the treatment of pain, opting to prescribe pills or recommend surgery rather than getting to the root cause of the problem. But if you are suffering with emotional or physical pain, there is hope. Join the founder and CEO of Bowen College, Manon Bolliger, live online for your body-mind reboot. Learn how to listen to your symptoms and get to the root cause of your pain. Plus, be trained in basic Bowen therapy moves so that you can reboot your body for optimal health. You don't have to live in pain. You can heal. Stop the pain pill cycle by visiting www.yourbodymindreboot.com to learn more and to register.
It's really interesting. Anne Schubert has been doing this work. She's a master Bowen therapist. I think she's 84. She's a mentor of mine. Amazing. Well, I would like to call her a shaman, really. But she was working with just listening to the body. She tells her story of she used to play music in her Bowen sessions, and one day her music tape way back got stolen, and she was stressing out. She started doing her Bowen without the music, and it was really quite profound that the people were starting to connect with some sensations that they were having, and it started from there. And she then linked up with another master Bowen therapist called Margaret Spicer, and together they were looking at the Chinese meridian system and how it was linking with the Bowen, and suddenly going deeper into the mind. They created the mind-body Bowen, and Anne Schubert has gone back to her original work now and has her course. She was the first person to have her course created online for people to do around the world on the Natural Therapy Institute site. But what I love about her work is, it's very simple. And, I've studied kinesiology and I find it quite complicated, like asking lots of questions and muscle testing. And I've realized that I love the work of kinesiology, but I'm not a kinesiologist. I like the zen of Bowen, where it's just so minimal. And yeah, but back to Anne's work is she just does a series like the first two 2 moves of Bowen to start, and it's like straight away she says the emergency's over. And if we can create the space, she just creates the space to listen, that, you know, sets the intention that I suppose she's coming into the space with that. If the body's ready, let's go. And the body will start reacting if it's ready for her work. And so she'll just look at what sensations are happening and then go into questions. If the sensations are reacting for 20 minutes, she will then go in and ask questions. And the questions will not be just random questions. They're based on the meridian system, which you're looking at using as a diagnostic tool. Say if someone's having, you know, tingling in their upper traps, it'll be like, well, that's linked to the kidney meridian and there's fear there. And so the questions will be, okay, so where are you feeling fear right now in your life? And then after the person expresses that, it's like, okay, so what was going on when you were born? What was going on in your life? Now, the difference between asking those questions when you're in Bowen zone, I call it, or when you're having a simple conversation, is that now we have told the body the emergency's over. Now we're tapping into the subconscious mind. And what I have experienced with the Bowen, or with this work, is that when a person expresses themselves in a Bowen zone, they're not re-triggered. Like I see that, you know, after like first session and there's many reactions and a person's expressed, it's like you're trying to find what is the core stress right now that we've been going over the top of. And I suppose kinesiology does that, but you know, we're doing it very simply where the body's telling me and deciding, and it's just coming out. So what I find is within the first treatment, the major core stress is going to come. And it's really, it's quite, it just blows me away. Like, it's so, sometimes when a person comes in to see me and I've never seen them before, I'm like, look, I don't even know how many moves I'm going to do today. Like, it could be 4. I really don't know. And, you know, I've got to listen to the body because, you know, we've been riding over the top and just getting on with life over some very deep upset or whatever's happening. And I can do that with my work, but this is so much deeper if we just listen and we stop. And, you know, really profound things happen. Like, you get to the core so quickly. In fact, I had someone yesterday that was really interesting, and she had a pain level of 10 plus for the last 6 months, headaches. And she is basically debilitated, can't work, on the highest pain medication, has to go into a dark room. And when it comes on, and I did the Bowen first session, just very basic, and her pain, you know, nothing was changing. I did the second session. I thought, look, I'm going to focus on the adrenals because she told me a bit about her past and I knew she had so much trauma. And she went away, and her reactions that night after working on her adrenals went to 10 plus, and she was out of action for 2 weeks. And obviously I was like, oh my God, she didn't want to come back. She canceled her session yesterday. And I said, look, let's not give up now. I know that something's going on because I triggered your adrenals and now you've gone off the Richter. And I'd just like you to try, let's just, if you can't afford it, because money was an issue too, let's just do a half an hour and I'll focus on the vagus nerve to try and regulate your system. Was so out of whack. And yesterday it just came into my mind to do the baby Bowen move. So I thought, okay, I'm going to just do it so simple. And then I thought, and then I'm going to do the jaw, you know, and I went to do her neck, and straight away I touched her neck and her pain went up to 10 plus. And she said, I felt like I had a hot iron on my brain. And I was like, oh my God. So I was just I said, you know what? It's okay. You've had a reaction now. This might be an entry point for me for some trauma work. And I just said, let's just wait. Let's just listen. So go out the room as you do with Bowen. And I come back in. She's like, no, it's still 10 plus. I'm like, okay, just give it a bit more time. Go out again. Come back in. And she goes, oh, actually, it's gone now. I'm like, okay, I'm going to continue on with the neck. And then it shot up again, but it wasn't as bad. And then, but it was still on 10. And then I went, you know what, like usually the reactions were sort of coming and going. And usually I'll go in with a trauma work if the reactions are persisting, like if that pain had have extended for 10, 20 minutes, but it didn't. It was kind of, it came and went. And I said, you know what? I don't even know if this lady's going to come back. I'm just going to go for it. And so I went in, I went, are you okay if I ask you some questions? And she's like, yeah, okay. So I went, all right, because I could see that it was the meridian and I could see it was just like a full fear response. And I said, where are you feeling fear right now in your life? And she said, well, actually, I just found out yesterday that my husband's having an affair. And I just went, oh, okay, right. And I said, and so when did this pain start? And she said, oh, 6 months ago. And I'm like, you know what? Your body knows everything. Your body's picking up on things that you don't even know. Who knows when this started? It might have even started 6 months ago. And then I just asked her questions about, you know, the fear now and what the fear is for her. And then going back to, okay, when you were young, where was the fear? And she talked, she was in a very abusive, her mother was very physically and verbally abusive. She was very neglected and in fear all her life. And after that, and I said, it's interesting because what's going on now is triggering for you your core wound right now. This really, like, I'm not lovable. I don't know what's going to happen. And she had a really kind of insecure life, like going to her grandparents and back and forth. And I said, you know, that's really deeply triggering for you, what's going on now. And I said, so what's your pain now? And it went to 5. So for me, that was a real, she was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's gone from 10 to 5. So I was just like, again, just this one example, this happened yesterday, just blew my mind of how our brain and what's going on in our story is linked to what's manifesting in our health.
Yeah. And I think, you know, and this is a perfect story to explain how it's stacked, and until you discover the origin of the stack, in a sense, right, or at least acknowledge that, it's hard to remove it, you know. So yeah, I think that's a great example. It made me think of one as well, but how, you know, internally I have this person, and I guess I'm not practicing now, I should have to say. But you know, friends and family, you can't help it, right? And that just becomes a larger group of people.
Yeah.
Anyway, but you know, who's experiencing um post what is it called, like post-herpetic neuralgia, right? Very, very intensely, and originally had taken homeopathy to get through the shingles part of it, which was fairly fast. But then when the neuralgia, which happens in 20% of cases, not all, that just caused sheer hell. And it's like, why? And now we know, you know, it can last a year to 2 years, but obviously there's more to the story. And with doing Bowen therapy, it became absolutely obvious that it was linked to being set on fire as a child, accidentally-ish, not really, but whatever.
Wow.
And basically not processing that whatsoever. And it's like the body just is in that locked state, of this is the trauma that has to be released. And even to the point that this person now smells smoke and fire and um, what's that called? Burning skin, right? So, and I had another guy, this quite a long time ago, but completely remembered being, in a dental office within a surgery and, was given anesthesia and was petrified by that experience. I actually did my TEDx talk on that. And it brought him back to that. Whereas, he was an actor and he had no problem until he had an injury that brought him back to this pain and he didn't know what it was. Right. So I think it becomes so important if you're going to do work like that to understand how trauma really works, and what our role is in liberating it, which there's different methods of that. I mean, I have my own method I use. But it's really, yeah, it's important to do that because it's like a window in which the connection and, my background as a naturopath, I do know Chinese medicine. So you can see, this is fear related or this is that meridian. So you kind of put things together and you go, oh, okay, this is, what we have to release. But if you look at the complexity and yet how simple this is, and you look at therapies that are, harder, stronger, more invasive, and all of that, including surgeries and, and so-called drug therapy, it's never going to touch this layer of healing, right? This is like, it's like totally in the wrong field. The answers are not going to come through this 3D and, and pounding impact on the body and spirit, right? We're so much bigger than that. And so anyway, it made me want to say all that.
Yeah, look, I agree, and I think it's interesting because I think the further we've become disconnected from nature, the more we've become. That's why, nature is my first passion.
Right.
I believe that we've become disconnected with our inner knowing. And if you look at the ancient healing, the shamans, there's a revolution in that work at the moment because people are seeking this deeper level of healing.
Yeah.
That, if you look at Chinese medicine, I mean, how we're just catching up now, and we are just scratching the surface. I mean, it's only 15 years ago, if not 10 or 15, that we didn't even believe that meridians existed. And until they had the technology, obviously in China, they're using it in their hospitals, that they actually put a lot of money into the research over there. They could now prove that meridians do exist. And this is where we're at. Same with the Bowen work, is we are just scratching the surface with understanding what we're doing. And there's going to be an absolute explosion of knowledge in the next 20 years of understanding the link with the autonomic nervous system. And I believe that, the ancients knew this, and it was because they were connected to the natural world. I mean, if you look at the meridian system and how precise it is, you think, how on earth did they know that? How on earth did they know that that emotion gets into that meridian? And, it's a science. And I believe, like, if we look at all spiritual traditions or philosophies going way back, the ancient ones, that it's all sort of saying the same thing. It just looks different. And like you said, healing, like you said, if you have a wound or something going on, is so much more than just this 3D. It's actually coming to the surface to tell us that deep change is needed. And I think that's the transformation that we're all here to do.
Yeah.
And so I look at it as a much deeper, it's like the calling for us to come back to who we really are. And I believe we are, like, I love the Eastern philosophy, and it resonates with all mystical traditions, is we are a vessel of the spirit. And ultimately, trauma and all these events have just filled this vessel. And this vessel's become blocked to connect with our ultimate divine selves that is connected to all things, the grid. We're in the grid, and all the information, it's all available to us. We don't need, we're always seeking out there. But as I get further into my understanding of myself and humanity, it's more about, like you said, what Chris Duncan is saying is, we're not broken. We don't need fixing. It's more about, we just need to reconnect with our soul, because and just empty the vessel and clear that vessel, so that we can have a free flow of that our divine self to come forward. And I believe no one escapes. Everyone, this intergenerational trauma that we've inherited, that it'll come up to the surface for everyone at some point.
Yeah.
And we can either decide, am I going to continue down that path or not?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. Well, there's been an overemphasis on the frontal cortex, right? The understanding of it on that way, and the making the, creating meaning, which is, part of our humanity, but giving meaning to aspects that have happened, so that our stories in a way are what limit us from actually feeling directly the experience and the possibility of more, of more insight into it. We're kind of bogged in our minds, I think, and as we start to lose that, which I think is optional, but I think we can do that. I think we're going to be much more sentient beings, which sounds promising anyway. Listen,
And there's
I should give you the last few words, because our time is up, but go ahead, please.
Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say, and in our society, it's more challenging than ever before, because there's so many distractions. And I realize in myself how after studying Shen-gong, which is like more spiritual practice and meditation of Qigong, was that I realized my own addictions to feeling the void, whether it's music or food or just keeping busy, to take me away from myself, to take me away from looking deeper and just being with myself, and whether it's someone else feeling the void and I realize how much it's through that practice, I realize how much I even run away from my deeper self, So, but it's a, profound, I think the mystics, the ancient ones have a lot to teach us. And I think where there's a resurgence of moving back to our traditional spirituality in a really positive way.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, what a pleasure to have this discussion with you. That's the goal of my podcast, is true discussions about, real things happening in practice and life, right? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manon, for all the work that you do and for providing this wonderful platform for us to come together and, just share our joy and our passion. So thank you for all the work that you do. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us at the Healers Café. If you haven't already done so, please like, comment, and subscribe with notifications on as I post a new podcast every Wednesday with tons of useful information and tips for natural healing that you won't want to miss.